Okay. And just 1 second. You're good to go.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Congressional District 1 Democratic Candidate Forum. Mahalo to all for joining us today. My name is Abby Simmons, my pronouns are she, her, and I am chair of the Stonewall Caucus. I will be helping facilitate the candidate forum and am providing an overview of today's format. Our moderator today will be Neighborhood Board Vice Chair and Stonewall Caucus Steering Committee member Dale VanderBrink, he, him pronouns. We have 18 prepared questions which have been submitted by our co-sponsors. Our co-sponsors are following caucuses of the Democratic Party of Hawaii: Stonewall Caucus, Hawaiian Affairs Caucus, Labor Caucus, Hawaii Democratic Women's Caucus, Education Caucus, Environmental Caucus, Veterans Caucus, and the Young Democrats of Hawaii. The questions will not be asked in the same order for each candidate. My recommendation to our candidates is to limit your responses to just over 2 minutes in order to get through all of the 18 questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. The order of candidates today will be Representative Della Au Belatti, followed by Senator Jarrett Keohokalole. Without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce our first candidate, Representative Della Au Belatti, and turning it over to our moderator, Dale.
Mahalo, Abby. Aloha, Representative Belatti. I hope you're staying safe and dry given the weather conditions today. Let's just jump right into it. Representative Belatti, you may begin with your 2-minute opening statement.
Aloha, Dale, Abby, and thank you to all of you who are here on Zoom, as well as to all of the caucuses that have offered us this valuable opportunity to connect with voters. I'm running for Congress because Donald Trump's policies are hurting Hawaii. I have a simple agenda. I want to lower cost, stop Trump's dangerous policies, and protect what makes Hawaii special. You know, we have an affordability crisis in this country. We had a crisis of values, and we have a crisis of accountability. And how do we make sure that we stop the influence of large corporations and large dark monies in politics? So for all of those reasons, I'm running to help make sure that Hawaii and our nation is a place that our children can be proud of, that Hawaii is a place that can continue to welcome and grow and lift up local families. I'm not going to use all of my 2 minutes, Dale. I want to jump right into the questions and answer all 18 questions. And I'm also open to any questions if we get beyond those 18 questions. So take it away, Dale.
Thank you, Representative Belatti. Moving on to our first question. PFAS is a group of thousands of man-made forever chemicals that do not break down in the body or the environment. Do you support enforcing the EPA's national PFAS drinking water standards established under President Biden's administration at all federal facilities in Hawaii, including the Department of Defense, especially in light of the Navy's scheduled March 2026 reactivation of the Aiea Halava shaft, despite PFAS detections at or above federal limits? Yes or no? Please explain your position.
Yes. Explain my position. The science says that these are dangerous. We're learning about it now. And so we should apply and use the best applicable, practicable science that we have. I think we need to address this. We were beginning to address this in some of the conversations we were having. I'm very concerned that the community voice seems to be shut out now, or is beginning to be shut down more and more under this current administration. And that's why I'm running for Congress. We need to make sure that the EPA can implement the rules that were under the Biden administration. Now, what I'm concerned about is that those rules are going to be delayed. Under the Supreme Court's new rulings, you know, those strong rules are now undermined. And so we are going to have to do a lot of work to strengthen the EPA and make sure that we can use the best science available. It's not, I answered the question simply, Dale. Yes, we need to do that. But actually, the rolling back of so many rules right now, the gutting of agencies like the EPA, it's going to be more than just about implementing those rules. We have to rebuild the infrastructure that has been now torn down by this administration.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question number 2. Do you support increasing federal investments in public education, including Title I, special education, and school-based mental health services, even if it requires raising new federal revenue from corporations and the wealthy? Why or why not?
Oh, this one's easy, Dale. Yes. Yes, we need to rebalance the tax system. The one big beautiful bill is giving away billions of dollars while it's gutting and taking out all of the important public infrastructure we need, of which public education is one of those important functions, basic functions of government to fund. And so I am not afraid to have those conversations about how we reconfigure the tax system so that it favors more working families, and then we make absolutely the investments we need to in public education. I think my record at the state level has demonstrated that when it even comes to tough decisions that have to be made, when we have a mostly Democratic government, that I will stand up for public education in ways that my opponents have not also stood up for public education. So absolutely yes, Dale.
Okay, moving on to question 3 then. In this race, many voters are looking for a clear contest for representation. How would your approach to leadership in Congress differ from the incumbent's record, particularly on voting rights, advancing LGBTQIA+ equality, and standing up to federal attacks on vulnerable communities?
Oh, Dale, thank you for that question. Voting rights. I will absolutely have a different position than Congressman Case. In fact, it was his vote for the SAVE Act that first really inspired me to think about running. You know, the voter SAVE Act is voter suppression. And you better believe it that my values, even back then, would have said absolutely no on that vote. And it's playing out now. It's playing out now, even though Congressman Case has flip-flopped and has now voted against the Save America Act. It's under the current Save America executive orders that Trump has enacted that we see voting rights in Texas now. Women who the SAVE Act attacks are being turned away from voting polls because their papers don't match up. And so I will absolutely have a different, I will vote differently than Congressman Case, and I will vote with the values that stand with working people. On the issues of federal attacks, Representative Case did not stand with the delegation early on when we were seeing the attacks on our immigrant communities. I, from the very beginning, have been working with private attorneys, with the local groups here to make sure that our laws are strengthened, that we have rapid response teams, that we have legal observers. You better believe that what the actions I take now will be the values that I bring to Washington, D.C. And they'll remind me, the other important thing is fighting for our kids, our keiki, all of our keiki, trans, gay, LGBTQ. You better believe that I will stand there for them as well. My record demonstrates clearly from the protection of civil unions to the fight for marriage equality that I am going to stand up for all of our rights to ensure that we have the best access to healthcare, that our communities are not discriminated against. You can count on me for that.
Okay, moving on to question number 4. What is your position on legalizing recreational cannabis?
Dale, I have been a long supporter of smart cannabis policy. You know, after several years in the state legislature, I was the one that led the charge on the very first important decision, which was to shift medical cannabis from public safety to the Department of Health. And so, we went down that pathway. I was the one to lead the charge on creating dispensaries. I want to see a safe, regulated adult use market. You know why? Because that will make it safer for all of our keiki. And so on that issue, I think we need to work through a lot of issues. We need to, at the state level, we should be pushing for safe regulations and safe legislation. My concern is that as at the federal level, as we see the push to descheduling, our medical cannabis system is going to be rocked if that decision ever gets made, and then we are going to be left behind. And so, I think the writing is on the wall. Cannabis is something that is has been legalized in other states. So we need to move towards safe, sound policies. I wish we had a conversation in the state legislature now to do just that. I fear we don't. And so I think as a state, and then our federal delegation is going to have to find ways to protect our medical cannabis industry, at least until we have the kinds of policies that we need nationwide and statewide to ensure safe access to cannabis.
Thank you. Moving on to question number 5. Will you commit to protecting access to gender-affirming care from federal and state-level attacks coming from the continent, and to defend the rights of Mahu and transgender students, including their right to participate in school sports consistent with their gender identity? Why or why not? And please explain.
Okay, thank you, Dale, for this really great question. I think, in the state legislature, we are passing bills right now to protect access to gender affirming care. And it's a whole range, right, of care that we need to protect. And so that is a definite yes for me. I think it's really about bodily autonomy, and it's private conversations that people need to have with their doctors to make some really tough decisions sometimes. Tough decisions, whether it's about, ensuring that you can continue to have children, or it's questions about gender identity. I think those are conversations that need to be protected, and that's a conversation between a person and their doctor. On the issue of protecting our keiki from any kind of discrimination in the schools, I also believe that. I want to be clear on the issue of children and the ability to play on sports. That's a tougher question, Dale. And I think one of the things that I would like to see is that we need our sports organizations to really have the conversations and provide clear guidelines about when individuals who may be going through transition or not to be able to participate. Now, again, I think this is hard. It's a hard question, and it's a flashpoint. And so I think what we need to do is have conversations. I'll share an example. And this actually takes it outside of youth. I paddled on a team where I paddled with transgendered people, and I paddled in mixed crews of men and women. And so is there a way that we can integrate all of this? Absolutely. Can it be done with respect? Absolutely. Can it be done in an inclusive manner? Absolutely. But these, I think, are tough conversations that people have to navigate. And so I'm willing to open up those tough conversations. It's tough conversations to have in schools, but we have to do it respectfully, and we have to do it to be inclusive and not ever make anyone feel like they cannot participate.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question number 6. Cost of living in Hawaii has disproportionately negatively impacted young people, causing many to leave the state. What is your plan to address cost of living to incentivize our young people to stay?
Dale, that is a tough question, and it's multifaceted. And, we've been struggling with that, for probably as long as I've been in the legislature. And so I think we have to attack it in so many ways. I also want to start off by saying that question of young people, it bothers me every day. I have a 20-year-old who tells me, Mom, when I leave for the mainland, I am not coming back. I will likely not be able to have a job here that pays enough. I will not be able to afford a home. And I love you, Mom, but it's too hard to make here. So that question weighs on me every day, Dale. I think one of the things that we can do is talk about housing cost. How do we really tackle housing costs, which includes the federal government making investments in infrastructure, which is sometimes the most costly aspect of being able to build affordable housing. We have to have conversations about how do we speed up the regulatory process, but I want to be cautious and say that we have to ensure that we also adhere to environmental protections and guardrails. We cannot allow NIMBYism to operate, but we also have to look at ways to balance and ensure that our environment is protected. Finally, we need to look at innovative policies around all other things, like how do we make sure we have good jobs? Just recently, both the Fed, the U.S. Fed, I believe in San Francisco came out with a report, and then UHERO also came out with a report that it's not just about high costs, it's actually that we have an income problem. Wages of middle-class families are not keeping up with the cost of living. Why is that? Because corporations have been siphoning off profits for far too long to executive pay. And so what we need to do is ensure that we fix our income problem. What does that mean at the federal level? It means increasing the federal minimum wage. Full stop. We need to do that. Now, we're doing great here in this state because of the laws that I've helped to enact at the state level. But even our state minimum wage law is not enough. And so while our state minimum wage will creep up to $18, we know that a living wage in the state of Hawaii is more like $26 an hour or $30 an hour when you talk about housing costs. So we need to make sure we have good jobs. How do we make sure we have good jobs? Well, we have to take care of our public education system. We have to invest in internships and workforce development that doesn't just focus on four-year college degrees. We need to look at all ranges of education, internships, working, trade jobs. We need to make sure we have strong unions that can provide good union jobs in the construction industry, in labor unions, in the environmental industry that's growing. Those are the kinds of investments we need to make, and those are the kinds of things we need to talk about and be doing.
Thank you, Representative. I actually wanted to follow up with what you brought up about minimum wage and our state minimum wage at $18. Do you support bringing the federal minimum wage up to that level?
I think that's going to be a tougher question to have because the federal minimum wage is so low now, but we definitely, like across the country, need to look at increasing the federal minimum wage. I don't know what that number is, Dale. And of course, when you get to DC, it's going to have to be a negotiation amongst the representatives and senators of all 50 states, right? And so I don't know what that magic number, Dale, is, but then in connection with raising the federal minimum wage, we have to do all of these other things. I left one thing out on housing. We also need to look at how we can help renters, right? And so one of the things that I'm very interested in, and we saw it during the pandemic, we saw that when we provided rental assistance, that we can really help people make sure that they can address cost of living needs. When we, during the pandemic, made sure that the child care tax credit was extended to all families, the child care tax credit that our current congressman did not support at one point in the process. We need to look at those kinds of policies too, to tackle specific drivers of cost in our state.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 7. Do you support the recently introduced Trans Bill of Rights? Why or why not?
Dale, my apologies. I have not seen what that Bill of Rights is, and if it was introduced at the federal level or the state level, but I certainly support all kinds of bills of rights, including making sure that our trans and LGBTQ community has access to the full rights, all of the human rights that we all should have, whether it's access to quality healthcare, it's access to educational opportunities, it's the right to be free from discrimination in the workplace. If that's what's in the Trans Bill of Rights, then yes, I support those measures.
Thank you, Representative. It is a new bill, so that's understandable. I believe it was introduced in the last 2 weeks. I can move on.
I will look it up, Dale. I will definitely look it up.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 8. Do you support a significant federal investment to raise teacher pay and address the teacher shortage in Hawaii, including housing assistance and loan forgiveness for educators who serve in high-cost areas? Why or why not?
I definitely think we should look at ways of making sure we make investments into teacher pay and teacher workforce housing. I think we need to actually do it for all workforce housing and development to make sure that we can hire and retain the kinds of teachers we need. I will say we have long had federal programs helping and assisting doctors and healthcare providers. That's in fact what, as health chair, and most recently, that's a health repayment loan program that Governor Green has championed. We absolutely need those kinds of investments for teacher pay, teacher retention, teacher workforce housing.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 9. Native Hawaiians continue to face disparities in housing, healthcare, education, and environmental protection. What specific federal actions will you champion to address these inequalities? And how will you ensure Native Hawaiian voices are centered in decisions that impact our Aina and communities?
That's a broad question, Dale, and I love it. Actually, as a part of just kind of background history on me, one of my first political experiences was actually being able to intern for Senator Daniel Okaka in the first summer of my college years. And I had the wonderful opportunity then to work with Esther Kia'aina, who is now a council member. And I can remember us doing research for the apology resolution. I think there needs to be an incredible amount of work that needs to continue to be done with educating our mainland, our continental counterparts on the difference of the history of Hawaii, so that we can make sure and ensure we have allies that protect the important Native Hawaiian programs that we have at the federal level. Dale, remind me the rest of your question. There's so many things, there's so many pieces of it. We have to make sure that in the efforts to cut DEI, that Native Hawaiians, we need to stand up for them. We need to stand up for all of these programs that are being cut. Could you repeat the last part of the question, Dale, so I can make sure I answer it correctly?
Of course. I think you might want to focus on the first part. It's Native Hawaiians continue to face disparities in housing, healthcare, education, and environmental protection. So how would you help ensure Native Hawaiian voices are centered in decisions that impact our Aina and communities?
Thank you. On that note, I think the way that the military land leases are being handled now, that at the end of last year, when there was this talk and almost like talk that did not make sense about condemnation, I think that process was not helpful to this situation. I think the call for OHA to be more involved is something that we need to support. There have been measures that have been moving through or introduced into the State House and the State Senate. I have tried and advocated for us to have hearings on those important measures to make sure that Native Hawaiian voices are being heard and centered around these really important questions of Aina, of land leases, of how do we protect our environment. It concerns me. So we need to speak up more about that. I'm trying. I think in the timeline that we have for some of these issues, there's opportunities. I do know that members of the congressional delegation are also monitoring the situation. So this conversation that we need to have needs to have Native Hawaiians at the table. Right now, it makes most sense through groups like Office of Hawaiian Affairs, all of the regional groups, the home development, the homestead associations, all of those people need to be at the table because this affects them so critically. And so we need to listen and make the time and create space and in the process to make sure we are truly listening and allowing for a strong negotiation over those land leases and over any kind of environmental issue, whether it's Red Hill and how we're going to clean up that situation, or it's the land leases. So many of those things, Dale, we need to make sure we have Native Hawaiian voices at the table.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 10. Do you support expanding federal climate resilient funding for Hawaii, including FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Grants, NOAA's Coastal Resilience and Coral Restoration Programs, and the Department of Interior's Watershed and Coastal Protection Initiatives to address sea level rise, coastal erosion, extreme weather, and wildfire risks highlighted by the 2023 Lahaina wildfires? Yes or no, and please explain your position.
Yes. This is where the federal government can invest and has the ability to invest in cities, states all around the country, and that's what they're equipped to do. I am not as familiar with the NOAA program or the DOI program. I am more familiar with the FEMA programs as I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and we have jurisdiction over emergency preparedness. What I will say though is, and what disturbs me about this administration is that they're restructuring all of these agencies. So I absolutely believe we need to invest in resilient communities. We're having conversations here at the state level about how we can make sure HIEMA, which is the connecting agency to our federal FEMA, is structured in a way so that they can talk to FEMA. But at the same time, on the federal level, we need to be making sure that they're not gutting agencies like FEMA, which this administration is doing. They're trying to move, excuse me, toward a block granting system. We now know that FEMA is being cut in ways that we can't see by the employee cuts that they're making. And so there's going to be a lot of work that we need to do, not simply to invest in grant programs, but to invest in these agencies that have been gutted, Dale.
Thank you, Representative, and feel free to take a drink of water while I go through the next question. Question number 11. Other than access to healthcare, what do you see as the biggest problems facing veterans, and how would you help alleviate that challenge?
That's a great question. And you're taking healthcare out of the equation, right? I think, well, I have to say, I have to make a plug. Healthcare is so important because veterans, when they return, especially our combat veterans, they come with a whole slew of problems that we need to help. So healthcare is definitely one of the most important things, but we have to talk about housing. We have to talk about workforce, how to reintegrate them into community. Those are some of the really important issues that need to be worked on for veterans. Yeah, that's what I would add. That those are the things I would say, Dale. Okay, and I will also say, because this is something we really are working on, it's healthcare, but it's the veterans healthcare clinics that the federal government is so important in funding. Again, it's part of healthcare. We need to make sure those things continue to get funded. We had the Oahu Veterans Care Home that was opened up recently. Plans are underway for Maui. So we need to make sure that those commitments, one, are put in place and then honored.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 12. Do you support a national law mandating paid family leave? If yes, what will you do to achieve this? If not, why not?
I do think we need to have that conversation about paid family leave. I think if we need to do it incrementally, we should do that. And the reason for that is that it may be complicated from state to state, but we need to start somewhere. And so I think what I had been excited about when it was the Harris-Trump race, that there were more conversations around family leave and what the federal government could do. It's disconcerting that, I think this current presidential administration also put out plans, but we've not seen one. I have not seen movement on it. And so we need to jumpstart this conversation. And yes, I think some kind of national paid family leave program would be something that we need to look into.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 13. Hawaii is the highest level of union density per capita in the United States. Will you champion the passage of the Protect the Right to Organize Act or similar labor-centric legislation? And if so, how will you? And if not, why not?
We saw the greatest leaps and bounds for the middle class family when we had strong unions. And so I don't know the details about the Protect Union Workers Act, but we definitely need to make sure that people are encouraged and we protect our unions. I will also say again, the gutting of the National Labor Relations Board. What we're seeing lost right now is going to be hard to build back. So it's not just going to be about enacting these laws, but it's also going to be about how do we rebuild these organizations that have been gutted by this federal government. In my own practice as an attorney And I've practiced civil rights law and practiced as a lawmaker for the last 20 years. We're seeing it. The case law is uncertain. We're dealing with lawyers who don't necessarily understand that the challenges we're bringing because they're so new. And so the damage that's being done right now to federal employees is frightening. So we're talking about federal unions as well. We're gonna have to rebuild a lot back.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 14. Do you support the right to an abortion? If yes, what would you do to support that right at the federal level? And if not, why not?
I support the right to reproductive health care access, and that includes abortion care, it includes gender affirming care, it includes everything that makes sure that we can thrive as individuals in our communities. Now, should we have a conversation about how do we codify Roe v. Wade that was lost with the Dobbs decision? We certainly need to do that. Other countries have those kinds of laws, and so we need to have those tough conversations. I think in the meantime, though, what we are seeing and the attacks on abortion care, on reproductive health care, is happening at the state levels. So we need to also make sure that we're electing up and down the ballot people who care about access to reproductive health care and will operate on those values. So you can you can trust that I will do what I can to help both at the federal and the state levels ensure that our people have access to the strongest laws and protections to ensure that they have access to the appropriate care that they need in consultation with their doctors.
If I can just ask a follow-up with that, given the
Sure.
difficult nature it is to work within Congress, both on the House and Senate side, how would you go about working with your, if you get elected, those fellow congressmen and senators to protect the right to an abortion?
I think that's where those tough conversations have to happen, Dale. And I think that's about building relationships and it's understanding where people are coming from. Look, I'm a Catholic. So the question of abortion, as staunch as a supporter of the right to abortion care that I am, you know, the questions about when does the clock start ticking that you can have an abortion? When is the age at which youth can make the decision without the consultation of their parents? Those are really tough questions. And so those are the kinds of questions I think people need to be able to have the space to have. And that when we build and craft out the laws that we can ensure that compromises that can be made that don't compromise the entire access to healthcare. So right on both ends, right to abortion care, whether it's the right of a youth person, someone, a minor, at what age can they make that decision? And then on the other end, when abortion is about choosing the life of the mother or the fetus, I'm going to stand on the side of you need to let that individual woman have that conversation with her doctor. And then you need to honor that decision, whatever that decision is at that time, because these are so personal decisions. And these are decisions that impact life, the actual life of people. And so we need to create the spaces to make sure people can make autonomous decisions.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 15. In Hawaii, where we rely on vote by mail and accessible registration to serve neighbor island communities, service workers, and kupuna, the SAVE Act's added proof of citizenship requirements could create new barriers for eligible voters. Would you support similar legislation? How would you protect the access to the ballot here at home?
So I think I already answered this question, but I want to answer it again because I am actually very, 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 very passionate about this show your papers bill. I will say again, when Congressman Case decided to vote for that SAVE Act in February, 1 month later, I made sure I had my passport purchased, and it cost me $185 to get it. And you know why? It's because I changed my last name. So my birth certificate does not match up with my license, nor did it match up necessarily with my passport. Is this a real threat? We are seeing now, like I said, polls in Texas where women are being turned away. The show my papers kind of policy is something I never ever would have voted for. And I will share one more story with you and the people who are listening. Do you think it can happen to us? Last fall in August, I was traveling with my daughter from Boston to from Honolulu to LA to from Honolulu to Boston, LA, and home. We got stopped in Los Angeles because I had made a mistake on my daughter's birthday. And because of that, we were stopped. We were asked to show our papers. That was August of this year, before all of these things that are happening, that we're seeing happening now in other states. And so you better believe I will never support something like the SAVE Act that requires us to show our papers to prove who we are. In terms of what we can do to protect states' rights, we don't have real problems of voter fraud. So I think we need to strengthen and ensure that our voting processes here in the state of Hawaii are one, invested in. We need to increase and make sure that access to voter registration by mail remains and vote by mail remains. But I will also say that it's important for us to invest in the infrastructure to make sure that there are more voting service centers. We need to invest in the democratic infrastructure to make people feel like they are confident in our voting system. So I will support all of those efforts, Dale, both at the state and federal level, to make sure people have access on the days before, so that they can register to vote, and preserving our system of mail-in voting here in the state of Hawaii.
Thank you, Representative. On to question 16. How will you actively advance Native Hawaiian self-determination, including federal recognition, protection of ceded lands, and meaningful consultation, rather than treating these issues as symbolic or secondary priorities?
Can you say that again? It was ceded lands.
Of
What were the
course,
three?
including federal recognition, protection of ceded lands, and meaningful consultation.
Okay, thank you, Dale. On all of those things, yes, it needs to be more than performative. But I will say that, like, having worked on the apology resolution, I mean, that was the last time there was any real big federal push. We need to continue to have that conversation. I think federal recognition and as well as recognition of the nation of Hawaii, there is a process that's going to be occurring here. And I know that folks in the Democratic Party are not sure about the Constitutional Convention process, but the Constitutional Convention of 1978 is what gave us the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And I think, the context that we live in now is very similar to the period in the 1970s, where you had people who were concerned about the environment, concerned about Native Hawaiian rights, concerned about whether or not our democratic structures here in the state of Hawaii, whether the state legislature was really working for us. And so I think that confluence of factors are happening now. And I think we can have a better and further discussion, both as we lead up to the question of whether or not we should have a constitutional convention. And if it does actually happen, then I will be the first one out there saying we need to make sure we have Native Hawaiians represented in any future constitutional convention we may have. Now, with that said, putting that aside, on the ceded lands question, we need to push our state lawmakers to make sure that we fulfill the obligations that we have under the ceded lands and public trust doctrine, public law land trust doctrines. And finally, what was the last thing? Federal recognition, ceded lands, and meaningful consultation. We need to hold our federal agencies accountable to those requirements of federal consultation. We need to not bypass the system around the consultation around military land leases by saying, oh my goodness, there's going to be this threat of condemnation. We need to engage meaningfully now. We need to hold our federal and state partners accountable to follow those processes. And then if we need to strengthen those kinds of laws as we move forward, as future Congresses move forward, you can be sure that I will support those things. In my training as a lawyer, I received my environmental legal certificate at our great law school here in Hawaii. I wrote a paper on the Kapa'akai analysis and the requirements for cultural assessments. It's those kinds of things that are unique in Hawaii that we need to make sure are embedded in laws and regulations, even at the federal level. And those are the kinds of efforts that I would push, Dale.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to question 17. With the SAVE plan likely ending for many student borrowers, what is your plan to A, make higher education more affordable and accessible? And B, how would you collaborate with others in Congress to ensure that your plan is passed?
So seeing that the SAVE plan is going to likely be ended, we have to work on this because we know that in Congressional District 1, we have over 75,000 borrowers of student that have student debt. We have an average balance per Hawaiʻi borrower of over $39,000 that's owed. So we need to look for ways to make sure that the SAVE plan is enacted, hopefully with the election of more Democrats across the nation. In the meantime, I would look into ways that we can, if we're not going to be able to help reduce federal loans, Dale, we need to look at ways that we can make sure that those who are coming out of schools and institutions of learning, as well as out of, apprenticeship programs, have good jobs so that they can then address the high cost of education.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to our last scripted question here. Last year, 10 Democrats voted to censure Representative Al Green over his verbal protests regarding the Medicaid cuts during the 2025 State of the Union address. If you were in Congress at that time, would you have voted for the censure? Why or why not?
I would not have voted to censure Representative Green. And, we have seen the devolution of decorum in Congress, but it's happening from all sides. And I think what we need to make sure is that, like, what he was upset about, and now that we see the consequences of some of those decisions that he was warning about us back then, that was his right to free speech, and so that never should have happened. We should not have censured him.
Thank you, Representative. We still have about a little over about 10 minutes left, and I can again move on to questions from the audience that we have gotten. From our first question from the audience, what is your position regarding the current withholding of DHS funding until Democrats' conditions on restraining ICE are met?
So DHS, Department of Homeland Security funding, I think the current position is that they need to hold the line on that and make sure that we get meaningful reforms, because what we're seeing happening in places like Minnesota, California, in other places where there have been surges of law enforcement, immigration enforcement into communities, makes our communities unsafe. And so I would support that effort to make sure that, negotiated best as possible to make sure reining in ICE, CPB, all of these agencies that have been boosted through the funding already coming through the one big beautiful bill. Safeguards need to be put into place.
Thank you. On to the next question from the audience. Do you support universal health care? And what type of universal healthcare system do you think we should have if you support it?
I support that we need to move towards some kind of universal healthcare system. And I have long worked and listened to the advocates here at the state. And I've always said to them, you need to shift the language and the conversation to the federal government. Now, what plan do I prefer one over the other? It's not something that I can easily talk about, Dale. But I do think that, like, if we look at Medicare for all, and that we look at how can we shift and make Medicare for all more inclusive of people younger and younger as an option, that's one way to do it. But this is a complicated area, so I don't know which plan to choose over the other, except to say that we need to move towards it. I will also say that it has to be something that's done because we have to understand what's happening with Medicare and Medicaid, and then we have to understand our own market and how we can make sure that the plans that we have in place and the Prepaid Healthcare Act, that's the only employer-based healthcare program in the nation, can be integrated into any conversation we have about universal healthcare for all. In the meantime, whatever plan we choose and whatever ways we choose to systematically improve access to healthcare, first insurance, but then also actual healthcare. We need to talk about reimbursements to physicians under the various federal programs. And so it's not just there's not just one piece of it that's going to have to be fixed. There's going to have to be multiple conversations around how do we strengthen healthcare nationally, but then how do we make sure that we can also ensure that healthcare in Hawaii is also advanced. And one final thing I will say is that even as we're having this national conversation of what healthcare, universal healthcare for all might look like, what Medicare for all might look like, we in our own healthcare system, in our own ecosystem, are having this conversation around HPH, HMSA, right? And so even our system under the current Prepaid Healthcare Act is under flux because the cost of healthcare has just been exponentially rising. And so we have to pay attention to those efforts too, Dale. And then the conversations that we have as we craft a national healthcare legislation is going to have to take into those considerations. And I think that's where having someone who is who wants to dive into the subject matter like I do, who wants to build relationships that I know I can, so that we can have conversations across party lines, across different states that have different kind of ecosystems, healthcare ecosystems. I think that's why I'm going to be better positioned to help advance this conversation forward. And Dale, at a recent community talk story I had, someone was saying, "Wow, that's like going to take 10 years." And my commitment for this job is that I am running for this position so that we can tackle those tough problems they're not universal healthcare is not going to be solved in one session. It's not going to be solved in 2 years. This is going to be a conversation that's going to be pushed. I hope it gets advanced more quickly if we can have a blue wave across the nation. But you better believe I will roll up my sleeves and have those conversations and bring the experience that I've developed in the last 20 years to the conversation and make sure Hawaii has a voice at the table.
Thank you, Representative. Moving on to our next question from the audience.
Just
This
1
one,
second, Dale. A time check, 5 minutes left.
thank you, Michael. I'm going to put a 5-minute timer in the background so just we can keep aware of that. So the last minute will be for your closing statements. The next question then from the audience is related to education. Recently, the Hawaii State Teachers Association endorsed one of your opponents. What will be your words to people who believe public education is their primary issue, and what would you say to them to get them to support your candidacy?
What I would say to them is that look at my record, look at my history as an educator myself, that I've always stood up to make sure that we vote for a budget that supports public education. A couple of years ago, I was one of just a handful of people who voted no on the state budget. And why? Because of the cuts that were made to public education and higher education. So even within a Democratic majority, we have to be able to stand up and say what's important. And in those instances, public education, K through 12, pre-K through 12 was being harmed. And so it was really important for me to take a stand at that point. Dale, at this point, is now the time when I should go into my closing statements with the 3 minutes up?
We do have 3.5 minutes remaining, so I can go to one more question, and then for the last minute, you can use for your closing statement.
Okay, go ahead.
Of course. The last question here is related to conversion therapy. And in our state, it did take about 8 years to ban conversion therapy. And as someone who was a former Health and Human Services chair in the House, why did it take 8 years to necessarily ban it?
I think, Dale, we need to look at the composition of our party, of our state. And we have a red wave coming to parts of our community. So navigating that difficult question and making sure that we could pass it was something that I worked hard on. I think now, with more, even with the red wave, we now have young leaders like Representative Tam, who just stood up recently on the House floor and defended these bills. And so I think we needed more and stronger allies, and we now have those people in the state house to help champion this. And I think that was one of the reasons why it took so long, but you can believe that I was behind the scenes making sure we were trying to push this forward and building the coalitions that we need to continue to push these ideas forward and protect these really important access points that we have.
Mahalo, Representative. And now since we only have 2 minutes left, I don't want to rush you through another question, so I'll just reset the timer for 1 minute and let you begin your closing statement. You may go when ready.
Thank you, Dale. I just want to say mahalo again for this opportunity to share my story, a little bit about me with you. You know, we need someone in Washington, D.C. who will fight for Hawaii, not bend the knee to Donald Trump and his dangerous policies, not someone who will take corporate PAC money while voting for interests and against ours. And I want to point out, I'm the only candidate who is committed to not taking corporate PAC money. We need someone who knows what it means to balance a family budget while the cost of everything else keeps going up. We're not getting that right now. And that's why I'm running. That's what I've always done from my first day in the state house. I have always spoken truth to power in order to do the right thing at the right time for the people I represent. And I will keep doing that in Washington, D.C. I invite you all to visit my website at dellavolati.com to learn a little bit more about me. And again, thank you so much, Dale, Abby, Michael, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Belatti. I'll be passing it back to Abby.
Mahalo to Representative Della Au Belatti for participating in this informative candidate forum. And before we get started with Senator Keohokalole, I'm going to turn it over to Stonewall SEC Representative and Steering Committee member Michael Golojuch Jr., he, him pronouns, who has been managing the tech behind the scenes. He will provide us with some important updates before we continue on.
Oh, thank you, Abby. Just 1 second. We got to this quicker than I thought. Oh, there we go. While I get this up, I want to thank everybody for, on behalf of all the caucuses and the Young Democrats, for being here with us today, taking part of your Saturday to hear from our wonderful candidates. While we switch out candidates, I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of some of the things coming up here on your screen. First up is March 6th is our biennial elections. This is where Democrats from across the state will go to their House districts to meet at the various different locations statewide. In the chat, you will find shortly a link to all the meeting locations at these biennial elections. We will be electing your district council officers and at-large members. You will then do elections for delegates to and alternates to the DPH State Convention, which is taking place on May 29th and 30th at the Hilton Hawaiian Village in the Tapa Towers. This year, we are going back to an all-in-person state convention. And finally, you will be electing your at-large delegates to the county conventions, if available in your county. What also is going to be available there? Other services at the meetings. How you can update your party membership, how to join the party if you're not already a party member, register to vote, update your voter registration. We'll have more information about the 2026 DPH State Convention. Information on how to run for the state central committee positions, including party chair, because at this time we will be electing the SEC representatives from all of our Senate districts at the state convention, and there will also be information about your county's convention. Voter registration. The deadlines for your paper deadline for your paper registrations to be received is July 29th for the primary and October 26th. Reminder that voters may register at any time online or in person at a voter service center. So we do have same-day voter registration in this state. And you just have to go to, if you haven't already registered or your friend hasn't registered, please encourage them to do it now. Or they can go to a voter service center when those open up 10 days prior to the voting, when voting starts. Now, election day, your ballots must be received by the County Elections Division by close of voting at 7 p.m. on election day, that is for the primary election, that is August 8th. Any ballots received after 7 p.m. on August 8th will not be counted. And then for the general election, it's November 3rd, again, 7 p.m. So we encourage making sure that when you get your ballots, vote, or get down to a voter service center and turn them around. If you have your ballot in your hot little hand 3 or 4 days out from the elections, we do not recommend putting it in the mailbox. We encourage you to find one of the drop centers closest to you, or a voter service center to turn that in. Because again, if for some reason the mail is slowed down for whatever reason, we've seen what the Orange Menace has been doing in DC, attacking our postal service. You will want to put that in one of those drop boxes, because that counts as just as automatic delivery to your county elections division. If you are a member of the party, the Democratic Party of Hawaii is always at its strongest when its members hold the power. Everyday people who believe in justice, equity, and opportunity for all step up, people just like you. From protecting voting rights to defending reproductive freedom and access to gender-affirming care. From fighting for working families to advancing climate action and civil rights. Here in Hawaii and across the United States, Democrats deliver when we organize and show up together. But none of this happens automatically. Party organizing, candidate support, voter outreach, neighborhood engagement, and year-round infrastructure are sustained by our voluntary membership dues. Your membership is what keeps the doors open, the lights on, and our work moving forward. When you pay your dues to the Democratic Party of Hawaii, you are supporting Democratic candidates at home, strengthening voter engagement and turnout efforts, defending Democratic values in our communities and at the legislature, investing in county party infrastructure and organized district by district, island by island. Membership isn't just symbolic, it's structural. It builds the foundation for victories at every level. Here's what's powerful. It only takes 8,000 of our party's more than 100,000 members to fully fund our annual operating budget via your yearly voluntary 25 membership dues alone. When we invest in this party, we guarantee that our priorities are shaped by the members, not by money. Membership dues are what keep the Democratic Party of Hawaii grounded, stable, and people-powered. That's real grass power. So if you are a member of the party, we ask that you pay your annual membership dues today, and there will be a link in the chat on where you can do that. And I do want to thank Aria Castillo for providing that script. And last but not least, we have on March 28th, the No Dictators protest. There will be the one at the Capitol here in Honolulu. If you are watching us from one of our neighbor islands, there are going to be protests at every county. We encourage you to get out there, use your voice, vote, but show up at the protest and engage with your fellow activists. So there you go. I'm going to put those links in the chat. And I'm going to go back. There's been a couple questions. Oh, it's March 4th, not March 6th. Sorry. Oh, this is what happens when you use slides. So March 4th. Sorry. Again, March 4th. It's Wednesday, March 4th, not March 6th. And I'm going to put the links to all the things I just talked about in the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing. So again, on behalf of all of us here, we thank you for participating with us. We're right on schedule now. Oh, almost on schedule. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. There are links to everything I just went over. I do want to thank you all again. Let's see. Let's see. We are just waiting on our next candidate. He should be in here shortly. There we go. Use this time to stretch your legs, grab something to drink. We will be back with you in 5 minutes. And I'm going to put some music on so it's not just dead silence for everybody. How about that?
There's something about the way the street looks when it turns to rain. There's a okay. Down the road, I wonder if you know I'm trying so hard not to get caught up now. But you're just so cool from your head, you're doing it's better than a mess. You take my hand and drag me in. Just be
Hey, Mike, I'm here. Hi, Abby.
Okay, there you go.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Excuse me. So, just a quick recap of today's format. We have 18 prepared questions which have been submitted by our co-sponsors. Our co-sponsors are following caucuses of the Democratic Party of Hawaii: Stonewall, Hawaiian Affairs, Labor, Hawaii Democratic Women's Caucus, Education, Environmental, and Veterans Caucuses, as well as the Young Dems of Hawaii. The questions will not be asked in the same order for each candidate, and my recommendation to our candidates is to limit your responses to just over 2 minutes in order to get through all of the 18 questions and maybe still have some time to answer questions from our attendees. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. And at this time, I am pleased to welcome and introduce Senator Keohokalole, and I'm turning it over to our moderator, Dale VanderBrink. Mahalo.
Thank you, Abby. Aloha, Senator Keohokalole. I hope the weather is doing better where you're living currently. With that being said, let's just jump right into it. Senator Keohokalole, I'm going to put a 2-minute timer on screen and you may begin your opening statement.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's a little bit better now. We had some flooding a little bit ago. I'm Jarrett Keohokalole. I grew up in Kaneohe and Kailua on the windward side of Oahu. I'm a local dad who's trying to raise 3 kids with my wife here in Hawaii. We met at UH Manoa and went away for school and work. And we came back. We tried to come back when it was time to have a family, and we didn't make it back if not for the support of our parents. And that's why I got involved in public service, because I realized that too many families are going in the opposite direction, and local people in Hawaii are losing control of the destiny of Hawaii. And decisions about Hawaii's future should be made by people in Hawaii, not by people from far away. So I currently serve as a senator in the state legislature. I've served in public office for 12 years. And that entire time in office, I've tried to address the hard problems that make life difficult and challenging and not fair for people in Hawaii. And I'm really grateful and thankful to all of you for making time on this wet Saturday morning to be with me and to listen in and ask questions. So thank you very much for the opportunity and yeah, let's get to it. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to our first question. Do you support the right to an abortion? If yes, what will you do to support that right at the federal level? If not, why not?
Yeah, I absolutely support a woman's right to choose uh, any of the private healthcare decisions that she needs to, and that includes the right to an abortion. In 2023, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, I helped lead an effort to pass Senate Bill 1. We intentionally used Senate Bill 1 to make a statement and a point that Hawaii is in support of reproductive rights and the autonomy of a woman to make healthcare choices for herself. We were up against opposition from a engaged and activated religious right, and by voices even within our own Democratic Party that were nervous about putting abortion on the ballot right after there was this monumental change in the law. We needed to change the law to clarify that women in Hawaii had the right to make healthcare decisions for themselves. And we also needed to make changes to the law to protect healthcare practitioners. I worked with our Senate leadership. We partnered with advocates in the community like Hawaii Women Lawyers, the Planned Parenthood Network, and the Women's Legislative Caucus. We brought OBGYNs into the legislature to meet with Senate leadership to explain how they were feeling about the changes and how they were afraid to provide healthcare access. Sometimes one or two doctors were the only people who could provide that type of access on the neighbor islands. And we expedited a bill and made it law because I thought it was important to support the efforts of women in the community and women in the legislature who wanted to make sure that they were safe in Hawaii and that Roe continued to remain the law of the land.
Thank you, Senator. If I can just ask a follow-up for the second part of the question, how would you navigate the difficulties of Congress in order to support a right to an abortion?
The Congress is the legislative branch. They're Article 1 in the Constitution. When the founders wrote the Constitution, when they sat down together, they put the Congress in first. So the Congress can make decisions to determine the rights and privileges or to clarify those inherent rights and privileges for people across the country. I think we should just be clear about that in the Democratic Party, that we need to support women's healthcare access and the woman's right to choose. We should absolutely push to codify it into law. We can work across the aisle because the polls across the country are pretty definitive about this. You have multiple generations across the country who only know a United States where women have the right to choose. And the fact that that's being scaled back right now is, people are literally dying across the country. So we should preserve this access point and fight in every way we can to make sure we maintain it.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 2. Other than access to healthcare, what do you see as the biggest problem facing veterans, and how can you help alleviate that challenge?
Veterans, we have a really sad and difficult problem with veterans making sure that they get behavioral health access. I mean, that's the thing that comes to my mind first. What's the most important thing we can do to help veterans in Hawaii is to help get the vets that are on the street off the street, to help get vets who are suffering from PTSD or who have substance abuse problems the access to services that they desperately need to get right. And I think in Hawaii we have a unique situation. It's not totally unique to Hawaii, but I think we should openly talk about drug policy, the impact that that's having in our veteran community, but also in our overall community of people on the street. I think one of the things we can directly do at the federal level is emphasize the challenge, the incredible challenge we have in Hawaii with methamphetamine. Most of our federal programs around drugs and substance abuse are focused on fentanyl, on opioids, on depressants. We need major change at the federal level to focus on stimulants like methamphetamine so that we can direct funds to our healthcare providers and our rehabilitation facilities and our social service providers to address the problems that are clearly driving a lot of the hardship in Hawaii. And that starts with methamphetamine. I don't want to limit it to the veterans community, but again, focusing on the people that are in the hardest position are I think where we should, maintain the most attention and effort. And that's people on the street. And most of the people on the street that have long-term mental health, behavioral health problems are addicted to meth. We don't focus on it enough in Congress. My opponent doesn't understand this issue at all. I grew up in a Hawaiian family in Kaneohe in the 90s that was ravaged by drug issues, by methamphetamine in particular. I saw it happening while I was a child, but I didn't understand what was going on. It's one of the reasons why I ran for office. We put a lot of effort and intention, my time on the health committee, in focusing on drug policy, and focusing on mental health care, and getting people off the street. And for people who serve the country, who put their lives on the line, who signed up knowing they could die, to come back and have to suffer like that is it's not acceptable. And we can do things to make it better at the federal level.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 3. Hawaii has the highest level of union density per capita in the United States. Will you champion the passage of the Protect the Right to Organize Act or similar labor-centric legislation? And if so, will you? If not, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm proud to be early endorsed by 6 labor unions. My dad was a construction worker. My mom was a nurse, both union members. I had 7 uncles that worked in the trades, all union members. And both of my brothers, I'm the oldest of 3 boys. Both of my brothers are heavy equipment operators, Local 3 union members. I think that the rollback of union protections that we're going to continue to see under this Republican administration, but Trump especially, who has a history of this, is really disturbing, and we have to fight. We have to start by protecting our federal workers and our public sector unions, who are going to see the more direct rollbacks of their rights and privileges and jobs because of how aggressively and vindictively the Trump administration has cut jobs and union rights. But there are steps that we can take legislatively. Again, at the congressional level, the job is to pass laws. And we can pass laws that take effect around the country that stem this rollback of labor rights and allow our unions to continue to stand strong so that they can negotiate for their members.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 4. Do you support a significant federal investment to raise teacher pay and address the teacher shortage in Hawaii, including housing assistance and loan forgiveness for educators who serve in high-cost areas? Why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely support that. We should be supporting education instead of cutting it at the federal level. There's plenty of fat to cut in the form of military spending, in the form of giveaways to Trump's billionaire friends, in the form of giveaways to Trump, who's suing himself as a private citizen for defamation against the federal government, and then who's defending those lawsuits against himself by taking full control over the Department of Justice. There are lots of avenues to support education, and there's lots of funds available. It's being made pretty clear at the federal government that we can provide the funding to make teachers whole and to incentivize the profession of education. I'm proud to have been early endorsed by the Hawaii State Teachers Association. My health teacher in the 7th grade was one of the first people to come out and sign wave for me, Miss Bellinger, when I was when I first ran for office in the House of Representatives. Teachers are members of our community, and we need more of them. In our community, we're short teachers, doctors, and police. That's why my number one priority is to address affordability, because what kind of society can function if we don't have those core professions staffed by people who are motivated to do their jobs because they can afford to make a living here? So 100%, we need to prioritize education. We need to deprioritize the graft and the waste that we're seeing right now. At the federal level, it's so frustrating. It makes me want to fight. That's part of why I get excited about this job, because I'm going up there to fight some of this craziness.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 5. In Hawaii, where we rely on vote by mail and accessible registration to serve neighbor island communities, service workers, and kupuna, the SAVE Acts added proof of citizenship requirements could create new barriers for eligible voters. Would you support similar legislation? How would you protect the access to the ballot here at home?
No, I would not support the SAVE Act. It's also one of the reasons why I decided to run against Ed. I think it's preposterous. The whole thing is based off of a lie that Trump lost the election because of voter fraud. He's full of it. Everyone knows it. There are, I think less than 24 incidences of actual voter fraud that take place every year out of a voting population of 160 million people across the country. Vote by mail is very popular in Hawaii. There are Republicans who are going to run in this election saying we should get rid of vote by mail. They're going to get crushed. I had knocked on doors during one of my elections in 2018, and I happened to be knocking on a door in a neighborhood when the ballots actually hit. And a kupuna came out and he opened the door, and he had the Star Advertiser election article with the faces of everyone who was running laid out on the kitchen table. He had saved it from a week before, and the ballot came in, and he took it out of the mailbox and he sat down and was filling it out, taking his time, no pressure to get out of the ballot box at the polling place, and filling it out by mail. It's convenient. It's been proven to be safe and valid. People have the rights and ability to track and access their vote. Voting is secure. We do not need to perpetuate this lie on the Republican side that we need super duper enforcement of ID requirements and all these things. The 24th Amendment bans poll taxes, which is what the SAVE Act is proposing. The bill is unconstitutional on its face. Poll tax is a term that our older generations hear, and it makes them crinkle their noses, because it harkens us back to a really toxic period in our history where people didn't have civil rights, starting with the right to vote. This is the wrong direction for us to be going. It's a big waste of time, and I can't believe there are representatives from Hawaii that are pushing this sort of thing. Just because they reversed their vote this time doesn't mean we should excuse the fact that that representatives from Hawaii were perpetuating this lie. It's ridiculous. So no.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 6. Do you support expanding federal climate resilient funding for Hawaii, including FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and community grants, NOAA's Coastal Resilience and Coral Restoration Programs, and Department of the Interior's Watershed and Coastal Protection Initiatives to address sea level rise, coastal erosion, extreme weather, and wildfire risks highlighted by the 2023 Lahaina wildfires? Yes or no? And please explain your position.
Yeah, thank you. Strong support of all of these. I've been a part of a number of these projects over the years in the legislature. In 2018, I helped pass state law that initiated the National Estuarine Research Reserve on the windward side in Kaneohe Bay, which was one of the final projects, NOAA projects funded by the Obama administration on the way out. Sorry, it was 2016, not 2018. That was put forward by the Obama administration and Senator Schatz. And much of the funding and research that's gone into that project is around how to make our coastal areas resilient. I've funded research projects in partnership with the federal government, including the military, the United States Navy, to do coral restoration work around creating more resilient coastal zones because the military has an interest in it. I mean, they did before Trump got into office because so many military installations in Hawaii, but also around the world, are built on the coastlines. So we've done research, world-leading research in Hawaii that creates good science-based jobs that have found that if you strengthen, these nearshore areas, including the reefs, that it helps provide a buffer against rising tides and climate events. After the Lahaina wildfires, I took my Consumer Protection Committee and conducted the first field hearing in 12 years at the legislature to go to Lahaina to hear from people about how their insurance claims were being managed because we were having trouble getting into the burn zone. And we did not want to hold a briefing at the state legislature in Honolulu when Lahaina wildfire survivors were rebuilding their lives and trying to keep their families together. And we weren't even going to do it in Kahului because a lot of these people lost their cars. So we took it to Lahaina because we knew it was going to be a big deal. We have long-term problems that we need to address. We are taking definitive steps on that at the state level by creating net zero goals, by putting together transportation planning to deal with coastal highways. We're taking the steps at the state level. We cannot continue to ignore the truth at the federal level. And so we got to do more at that level. Part of it is just, at every opportunity, making this administration and the Republicans admit what they know and see for themselves as well. That these historic weather events that we're seeing in red states, historic drought, historic flood, are all associated with the same thing we're seeing in Hawaii. And we need to just take some reasonable, definitive action on it.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 7. Do you support the recently introduced Trans Bill of Rights? Why or why not?
Yeah, I also haven't been all the way through it. I can tell you, I think our trans and Mahu community needs to be respected. I don't know what it's like to live the life of a trans person, but I do know through seeing it through my own experience how often trans people are harassed, are taken advantage of, are discriminated against, have trouble finding work, have trouble just navigating, their school life as adolescents, have horrible family situations sometimes. The incidents, this is one of the most vulnerable parts of our community in terms of suicide and substance abuse. We need to be supporting people who want to live in the life and in the body and in the identity that they choose. That's what freedom is supposed to be about. The other part is I haven't seen any Mahu in the Epstein files. So I don't really know what we're supposed to be afraid of here. I think it's ridiculous that we're just trying to, attack people that are different. So, I support efforts to empower everybody in our community to live the life they want to live. And it ain't none of my business what people do in their own homes as part of their own lives. Everybody should just get to live their lives and be happy. We shouldn't be trying to regulate, how people behave, how people live, especially if they're not hurting anybody else. If there's a trans event that's open to the public and people are uncomfortable, they don't have to take their kids there. They don't have to attend. I'm not the biggest fan of like polka music. So I'm not going to those concerts and going, this is horrible. We should do rules about it. It's kind of how I feel about that.
Thank you, Senator. And it was a recently introduced bill, so it's okay you haven't read it. I know Representative Belatti didn't either. Moving on to question number 8. With the SAVE plan likely ending for many student borrowers, what is your plan to A, make higher education more affordable and accessible? And B, how would you collaborate with others in Congress to ensure your plan is passed?
Number one is we have to restore capacity to the agencies that manage student loans. I still have student loans that I'm trying to get forgiven, and I've been getting the runaround for 6 months since the Doge cuts completely gutted those agencies. people that, especially people that have signed up for public service programs that provide forgiveness, we need to honor those programs. We need to treat student loans like other forms of commercial debt that can be discharged, that can be renegotiated, that can be taken care of in a reasonable and affordable way for students. We need to make sure that higher education continues to remain an incentive, and fixing student loans, providing pathways for forgiveness or debt cancellation that make sense, that are reasonable, are things that we should be paying attention to, not just wholesale, cutting this stuff because I don't know, because Trump doesn't like liberals in colleges. We have big things we can do to address issues in colleges. I, for one, would like to take a hard look at these, $100 billion endowments at the top tier schools. I think schools of higher education at every level should be funded equally because they provide access for people of all walks of life to better themselves. And providing low rate student loans that are easy to pay off and easy to navigate is a real big part of that.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question 9. Last year, 10 Democrats voted to censure Representative Al Green over his verbal protests regarding Medicaid cuts during the 2025 State of the Union address. If you were in Congress at that time, would you have voted for the censure? Why or why not?
No, I don't like these stunts. It's a stunt. So much of the Trump administration actions right now are just stunts to distract people or to just capture headlines so that they can go and do horrible, actual substantive policy things. So we've had really horrible behavior on the Republican side. I mean, even Justice Samuel Alito skipped out the 1 year at the State of the Union. He came to Hawaii to do talks at the law school because the year prior he spoke out in a breach of protocol for Supreme Court justices while Obama was talking. You've had Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these guys shout all kind of horrible things when Democrats talk, and that stuff is just a waste of time. I'm not interested in that. We have real problems that we need to solve, like affordability, like protecting Medicare and Social Security, and actually fighting meaningfully to stop all this extremism in Washington. So we should focus on that.
Thank you, Senator. On to question number 10. What is your position on legalizing recreational cannabis?
Yeah, I support it. I wrote the cannabis legalization bill that passed out of the Senate 3 years ago for the first time. We've ever had a legalization bill pass out of one of the chambers of the legislature. I worked last year with Representative Matayoshi, who is an avowed opponent of legal cannabis, to revamp the dispensary program, including increasing the number of dispensary licenses, because there's been so much pushback about the small, we only have 8 dispensaries statewide, but we also put in meaningful enforcement measures and changed the rules so that things like Delta 9 and toxic CBD can be enforced against. We convinced the state attorney general to work with us to put together a reasonable cannabis regime. We flew to Massachusetts to meet with the Massachusetts Cannabis Authority, me and 2 special deputies of the Attorney General's office, and members of the Department of Health, and Senator San Buenaventura, who's now the health chair, to come up with a reasonable piece of legislation to put a responsible framework in place that also allows people who have been growing in backyards, maybe for multiple generations out in the rural areas, to come in and get a license and go straight and pay taxes and make it all work reasonably. After we got the Attorney General involved, the bill went from 58 pages to 319, but it represented comprehensive legislation that we were able to build a coalition on. So we'll do that at the federal level. We got lots of changes to deal with the rescheduling of cannabis, and overall we should just accept what's already obvious in our communities that people use cannabis, and we should try and figure out ways for the dispensaries and the people that are using cannabis in Hawaii to be able to access it in the state, not by national conglomerates who are going to take advantage if we do nothing.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question number 11. Native Hawaiians continue to face disparities in housing, healthcare, education, and environmental protection. What specific federal actions will you champion to address these inequalities, and how will you help ensure Native Hawaiian voices are centered in decisions that impact our aina and our communities?
I mean, you got to have meaningful consultation out in community. Meaningful consultation means you go out to communities and you knock on doors and you hand out flyers and you hold town halls and you meaningfully listen to people. It means you build coalitions of people who are involved in these different areas, like the Native Hawaiian Education Council, when it comes to Native Hawaiian Education Act funding, like Punana Leo, the tip of the spear of Hawaiian language revitalization across the state of Hawaii. The people that are out on the ground doing the work, like Papa Ololokahi, which manages Native Hawaiian healthcare funds and are in close contact with our federally qualified health centers that support Hawaiian communities out in rural areas like the west side of Oahu, like Waimanalo, but also on the neighbor islands where you have the hardest, the biggest problems with healthcare access. You have to reach out to the community and have conversations with people about what they need. And then you have to build coalitions and collaborate so that people know how to engage in the federal government's different systems and programs. It can get really complicated, and it's important to have voices that can speak with the community and represent the community. You know, I can't change my last name. I'm a Hawaiian. I've had to deal with that over the years in positive ways, but also in real negative ways. People sometimes see my name and then that's it for me. They're not voting for somebody with that long, scary Hawaiian name. And so it's not lost on me that out of 535 members of the United States Congress, if elected, I will be the only Hawaiian. As a Tahitian, if elected, I will be the only Pacific Islander with voting rights. The American Samoa delegate does not have voting rights. You know, we have Chinese, we have Japanese, Koreans, Filipinos in Congress. There are no Pacific Islanders represented in Congress, and I think it's important to have Native voices representing these communities. It can be done by, you don't have to be Pacific Islander or Asian or Native American to represent these communities, but having voices that are members of these communities does matter, and I think it's important. And all the Hawaiians know how to find me, and they let me know when they don't agree. And so I'm doing that work anyway. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Keohokalole. Moving on to question number 12.
It's actually Keohokalole.
Keohokalole. My apologies. I do slip up from time to time.
It's okay. It took me a while to learn.
Thank you. Question number 12. Do you support a national law mandating paid family leave? If yes, what will you do to achieve this? If not, why not?
Yeah, I do. And, you know, I just read an article about how this issue actually polls really well in rural communities across the country. And there's a change in sentiment across the country around, you know, even dads being able to take leave to be with the baby, right? Around middle-aged people like me, you know, I'm 42, having to take care of kids and parents. Right? You don't have to, I mean, the majority of the people, I would venture to say, that are watching this now have been through it in their own family, have been in a tough spot with a job when the baby came, or who have seen the slow, painful decline of a parent or a grandparent. Both of my wife's grandmother and my grandmother, they suffered a series of strokes, and the decline was slow and it was sad. And it was very hard on my auntie, who was the caregiver for my grandmother, and my mother-in-law, who was the caregiver for my wife's grandmother. And, you know, we're the most productive economic country in the world. We should be able to provide stability for the workforce who have to take care of family and also provide economically. So, this is a conversation that's due, and we can have it in Congress if only we stop wasting our time with the media stunts, like censuring Mr. Green.
Thank you. Moving on to question 13. Cost of living in Hawaii has disproportionately negatively impacted young people, causing many to leave the state. What is your plan to address cost of living to incentivize our young people to stay?
Yeah, when I think about this one, I think about my brother. I told you my dad was a construction worker. My mom was a nurse. They raised 3 boys, working full time, and they rented. They rented our whole lives. And my brother, he's got 4 little kids. He works construction. He works overtime, and he'll take the double overtime when he can to support his family, and they still rent. And I am scared all the time that they're gonna move away. And the biggest part of that is that they could use a cheaper place to live. I think 40% of our households in Hawaii are cost burden on housing, which means as a percentage of the income they take in every month, they spend too much on rent, or if they're lucky, on the mortgage. We need to build more housing. That's number one. I don't know that there is a whole lot of disagreement amongst me and my opponents on that, but it's about urgency, and it's about putting the priority on the things that really matter. So this has to be number one, and I just haven't seen that. And that's part of why I'm running for this. We got to put our finger on the things that people really care about and feel. I've done that in office. We passed over $2 billion over the last 7 years of direct subsidy just to build affordable housing projects. People get frustrated sometimes when they hear that number because they feel like it doesn't mean anything to them. And it's because it takes time for these projects to get online. So we haven't stopped. I've worked with Senator Stanley Chang in the Senate to revamp some of these programs. Some of the ideas are radical, but it's about getting more units available to young people, to kupuna on fixed incomes faster. It's about building more housing and making it available faster. I've cracked down and worked with Lahaina Strong on Maui to crack down on vacation rentals so that the pirates that are coming in and flipping units that working families were living in into vacation rentals and take them out of the residential stock, so that stuff comes to an end. And I worked on the $600 million appropriation for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the largest single appropriation for Hawaiian homelands in history since we became a state. And so, your value, look to your budget to look to your values. I've fought for housing funding, for restructuring, development of affordable housing. There's lots that we can do. The Housing as a Human Right Act in Congress is a good start. I would co-sponsor that legislation. I support it. We should push for it. And the Republicans know they need to address this. So there's progress that can be made there.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question 14. Do you support increasing federal investment in public education, including Title I, special education, and school-based mental health services, even if it requires raising new federal revenue from corporations and the wealthy? Why or why not?
Yes. Hard stop. I support that. We've never had, we're going back to the Gilded Age, like the Great Gatsby period before the Great Depression, where we have these uber billionaires. Right before the Great Depression, you had the railroad guys that had monopolies, steel and oil, and the banks, and those guys ran the government. It was just a small handful of ultra super duper duper rich people controlling the government, and they drove us into a Great Depression because of their greed. Doesn't that sound familiar now? They controlled the Congress, they controlled the president like puppets. They had monopolies over everything. When I see the development of AI, when I look back and I shake my head at how I used to like Elon Musk until he outed himself as an apartheid supporting racist crazy rich guy. I just think we're headed back in that direction, and it's the working people that are going to suffer. And so, you know, reining that in like we did during FDR's time, like we did in the period between FDR and the 70s when we started to roll back on taxing the rich, is the direction we need to go in before we get the Great Depression again that caused that change the last time. The period after World War II till about 1974 was the most progressive, productive expansion of the middle class in human history. And we had huge top-tier corporate tax rates, we had high income tax rates, and we had a lot of progress and housing development and prosperity for working people in the United States. So we should go there before the Depression hits this time around, not after.
Thank you. Moving on to question 15. Will you commit to protecting access to gender-affirming care from federal and state level attacks coming from the continent, and to defend the rights of Mahu and transgender students, including their right to participate in school sports consistent with their gender identity? Why or why not? And please explain.
Yeah, you know, I think I spoke already about protecting the trans community. You know, gender is a spectrum. I remember, I think it was the Athens Olympics in 2000. So I'm old for the people that weren't around for the Athens Olympics in the year 2000. But there was I think it was a South African female track star named Caster Semenya. And she was eliminated, she was disqualified from running in the women's track events because she tested too high for testosterone. And at the time, in the year 2000, the testing at elevated levels for testosterone classified her as a man, and she was vilified, and she was prohibited from participating in competition. What we found out later was that she had naturally occurring levels of high testosterone. You know, there's awesome genetic diversity across the world. We should just let people live, right? We shouldn't be hassling people like that. Now, when it comes to sports, we gotta have the sanctioning bodies deal with these really complicated issues of how you define gender on the basis of sport. In a lot of time, in the track and field space, they are still struggling with this. How do you test someone who's using performance enhancing drugs versus whether their hormone levels are just genetically different from the standards, right? What I do want to make sure is that we don't again turn this into the Al Green situation where you have Congress get involved, or at the state level you have evangelicals jump in and they try and bully the sanctioning bodies into making decisions that are not based on sound science, that are not based on any sort of fairness or opportunity for everybody to participate, and just focus on things that really matter. I think we had less than 10 trans athletes at the collegiate level. This is just something that the social issues like this, we need not be getting involved in at the congressional level when we have so much hardship across the country and so much to do.
Thank you. Moving on to question 16. How would you actively advance Native Hawaiian self-determination, including federal recognition, protection of ceded lands, and meaningful consultation, rather than treating these issues as symbolic or secondary priorities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I've been the chair of the Native Hawaiian Caucus, co-chair of the Native Hawaiian Caucus, and at the legislature, and chair of the Senate Hawaiian Caucus for the last 8 years. It's one of the harder jobs that I've ever had. And it's because there's a lot of difference of opinion in the Native Hawaiian community. So I personally support federal recognition. I think we absolutely need it to address things like the Kamehameha Schools lawsuit. But the thing I want to make sure is that we have meaningful consultation, which goes back to my earlier comment. These federal processes around recognition, they need to be done in a way that actually reaches out to the community. A lot of people don't know this, but last year the U.S. Patent and Trade Office did a listening session in Hawaii that was focused on hearing from the indigenous community about cultural appropriation, stuff like the Aloha Poke incident, where you had a Chicago company trademark Aloha Poke and then try and sue a poke shop in Waianae. And the U.S. Patent and Trade Office did one Federal Register announcement. They didn't do any social media bulletins, no press release. They didn't even contact the legislators in Hawaii, and nobody showed up for the meeting, and they counted that as consultation. So, the way to deal with these Hawaiian community issues is to actually go and engage with community. People are afraid of Hawaiians in PACs, and that's not the way it should be. The reason we had, I'm going to deviate a little bit and speak to something. Okay, there was a mention earlier of a red wave on Oahu. I think that's rubbish. We should speak directly. A number of these Republicans that were elected in the last several cycles on the west side or on the north shore of Oahu won by 100 votes, 123 votes, less than 200 votes. There's no red wave. We're having a problem with engaging these communities that feel like they're left behind, including Hawaiian communities like Nanakuli, which has the largest population of Native Hawaiians in the world. There's a Democrat that represents that very red area. And so my comment about these issues, ceded lands, pohakuloa, federal recognition, these problems are problems because people are, I think, afraid to engage with Hawaiians. And you got to go to these communities, not in a special way. You got to go the same way people engage with other communities that are in easier to access areas or that are more well-to-do or that have higher voter turnout rates. And so that's what we plan to do in this race. And that's the only way you can get things done is you got to organize. You got to engage people. You got to listen to them, and then you got to explain why participating in the process is going to benefit them in the long run. So we've done that at the ledge level. We need an inventory on ceded lands. Did you guys know we don't even have a land inventory on what state properties are ceded lands or not? So I want to mix in some substance there, but just circle back to the ultimate problem and solution, which is that you have to engage with community. You have to bring them along, and you have to provide them an opportunity to speak and be heard before you start proposing, the world-changing ideas.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to question 17. PFAS is a group of thousands of man-made forever chemicals that do not break down in the body or the environment. Do you support enforcing the EPA's national PFAS drinking water standards established under President Biden's administration at all federal facilities in Hawaii, including the Department of Defense, especially in light of the Navy's scheduled March 2026 reactivation of the Ea Halava shaft, despite PFAS detentions at or above federal limits? Yes or no? And please explain your position.
Yeah. And we're going to have to do it for the EPA because they're rolling all of that stuff back. I wrote a bill this year to ban PFAS in surfboard wax. And I did it intentionally just to highlight the fact that PFAS is pervasive in consumer goods. It's everywhere. We don't know enough about it at this point, and we need everybody to pay attention to it. I think what we've heard from the surfers is they didn't even realize that they're laying their full midsection of their body on a surfboard that's covered potentially with certain brands in PFAS infused surfboard wax for hours at a time while they're out on the water, and then it's sloughing off into the ocean. We banned oxybenzone several years ago because we knew that it was hurting the marine ecosystem and that it wasn't good for the environment. PFAS is worse because there are known human health factors that play into it. When it comes to Red Hill, I'll tell you, I've been really engaged in it since the spill happened in 2021. I was the health chair in the Senate when the spill actually happened. I rallied 24 of the 25 senators to sign on to a letter to the President and the Secretary of the Navy calling on federal leadership to shut down Red Hill, to pause their lawsuits, because if you folks remember in 2022, they were suing the Navy to contest the governor's closure of Red Hill. I think we have to have some really hard conversations with the Navy going forward on the reopening of those wells. I co-led the commissioning of the Red Hill Water Alliance Initiative report that provides a list of recommendations that we want the Navy to undertake to ensure that they're doing everything possible to take into account the fact that we don't know where all the fuel from the spill went, and we're only now starting to learn about the impacts of PFAS in our environment and in our water system. So I will, in Congress, I tell you what, I'm going to fight efforts for the Navy to fold up their tent and leave, to just filter everything and close their eyes and call it good without actually cleaning up or mitigating the aquifer contamination that is all but likely to have happened. We just don't know where, and we don't have the technology just yet to prove it. And we got to keep, working toward enforcing the precautionary principle, which is that, if there are chemicals in the INA, we need to employ our best efforts to avoid further pollution and to clean up our mess so that our grandchildren don't have to worry about this in the future. So PFAS, there's a lot to go on that. And excuse me, we shouldn't keep making it worse. It's time to say no.
Thank you, Senator. I've been told we do have about a 4-minute warning now, so I will just start the timer so you can see it on screen while I go into the next question. And as a reminder, the last minute will be for your closing statement.
Yeah.
So beginning with question 18, or finishing with question 18, I should say. In this race, many voters are looking for a clear contrast in representation. How would your approach to leadership in Congress differ from the incumbent's record, particularly on protecting voting rights, advancing LGBTQIA+ equality, and standing up to federal attacks on vulnerable communities?
I think I've spoken to a lot of that. I think approach is a big differentiating factor here. I'm going to make a long-term commitment. I've been in office for 12 years. I'm 42 years old. This stuff takes a long time to learn. I'm willing to dig in, to do the hard work, to build relationships, to understand the nature of these complicated systems. I'm a process person. When community groups come in and they ask, oh, can you help us pass the bill? We sit down and we work through the calendar. That's the first thing I do, is I show them the legislative calendar and I go, you want your bill to pass by here? You want to talk to these people before this date? You want to be in the building at the end on these days, and we will work together with you on that. We'll collaborate on emails, start a list, and start organizing. Because I like to bring urgency when there are problems. We got to run to the problems. I like the hard problems. I like to run to them. I like to get in there and try and figure out how to work it out, how to build coalitions so that we're all working together, and how to supplement people's efforts. It takes a lot for people from the community to, work up the courage to drive to downtown Honolulu, figure out parking, pay for parking, go through security, and go up into these intimidating spaces at the state legislature to testify. It's even worse when you have to fly to Washington, D.C. There have to be people who are willing to help be conduits and represent us and help people navigate through the system. We don't have to do it all alone. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm happy to be second banana and allow other people to take the lead on things. And I'm not afraid of fighting, even if it means we got to go alone. I've done that. I did that last year. And I think that's a different approach. And I think it's time for it. I think the moment calls for it. I think we need it, representing Hawaii in this very fraught moment we are in our country and our state's history.
Thank you, Senator. And right before we get to the last minute, my apologies, I'm mispronouncing your last name. As someone who was born and raised here, I still feel a bit embarrassed. I still mispronouncing some Native Hawaiian names, so hope to work on that up to the primary. But for this last minute, I'll give it to you for your closing statement.
Yeah, you're good. No worries. It's okay. I appreciate when people try it and they don't just go Senator K and give up, right? This is the legacy of my family. I feel responsible to carry it forward and create uh, a legacy that my children and my grandchildren will be proud of. My grandfather was the first cab driver on the Windward side, and I had kupuna talk to me about how they knew him and how he helped them. My grandmother taught in the kupuna program in the schools, and I want that they set up a legacy for me that that we enjoy because it's part of our community, and we're losing that in Hawaii. And I want to make sure that I carry that forward for my own family, but that everybody in Hawaii gets to raise their kids the way they grew up. Now we have prosperity here. We got to fight for it. We can't expect people on the continent to fight for us, to understand us. You need action, you need energy for that. I want to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us. I'll be passing it back to Abby.
Thank you so much. Mahalo to our two candidates today for participating in this informative candidate forum. I would also like to extend a big mahalo to our moderator, Dale, and to Michael for the planning, promotion, and tech side of this event, as well as everyone for your interest and for tuning in today's candidate forum. We hope you've all found this forum very valuable and informative. Please stay safe and dry. Aloha.
Aloha.